My name is Riley Jameson. I'm 27 years old, and I haven't seen my parents in 2 years. Not since they threw me out for refusing to marry a man I didn't love. So imagine my shock when I got a call from a lawyer last week inviting me to my grandfather's will reading. Not a voicemail, not a letter, a personal call. Formal, clipped, and intentional. Mr. Harrison Jameson included your name in the final reading, the attorney said. It is strongly advised that you attend. Not requested, advised. I stared at the phone for a full minute after the call ended. Grandpa and I hadn't spoken much in the last year. Not because we fought, he just got tired of my parents' games. They turned every conversation into a war zone. And even though he tried to protect me, it was easier to drift apart than argue every holiday. But still, I always thought he saw me. And now, I was about to find out what he saw in writing. The reading was scheduled at my parents' house, a modern brick nightmare of cold marble and glass walls that felt more like a luxury car showroom than a home. I hadn't stepped foot there since the night I was kicked out with 2 duffel bags and a cab fare. Still, I went, in a plain black dress. Hair in a simple braid. No makeup, no pretense. Just me. I walked into the room and the first thing I saw was my mother's smile. Not a warm smile, not a good to see you smile. A smirk. Riley, she said, like the name tasted bitter in her mouth. You look basic. My father didn't even bother standing up. Just flicked his wrist and muttered, You made it. Thought you'd be too proud to show up. I didn't respond. I just sat down at the far end of the long table, as far from them as possible. The only other people present were my uncle David, 2 of my cousins, and my sister Avery. Avery, of course, was dressed to kill. Expensive dress, hair curled to perfection, diamond necklace she probably bought with Grandpa's birthday money. She didn't look at me, just checked her reflection in her phone's camera and sighed loudly. The lawyer, Mr. Clayman, cleared his throat. Let's begin. And just like that, my grandfather's voice filled the room through a recorded video message. Yes. A video. He sat in a brown leather armchair, wearing a faded gray cardigan, and that same crooked half-smile I'd grown up with. If you're watching this, he said, I'm gone. And let's be honest, half of you probably wish I left sooner. Nervous chuckles. My father's jaw tightened. But I wanted to do this differently, because written words can be twisted, voices can be edited, but a face, that's harder to fake. He looked directly into the camera. I know this family. I've watched the games, the lies, the performances, but I also know who showed up when no one was looking. My heart started pounding. Mr. Clayman began reading the formal will, while the video played in the background. To my son, Malcolm Jameson. That's my dad. I leave the antique gun collection and the lake cabin on the condition he actually visits it more than once a year. My dad smirked. To my daughter-in-law, Cynthia, I leave my wine cellar inventory because she drank most of it anyway. Laughter in the room. My mother turned bright red. To my granddaughter Avery, I leave the Bentley. Not because she needs a car, but because I assume she'll need something to sell when the next influencer check bounces. Avery gasped. Excuse me? To my nephew David and his children, I leave my shares in the small publishing house. May you use them to do better than I did. David nodded respectfully. I waited and waited. Nothing. They moved on. My name hadn't come up once. Not a dollar, not a necklace, not a joke. My mom actually chuckled. Avery whispered, Wow, you got blacklisted. And my dad leaned forward and said under his breath, Guess you should have played along, huh? The humiliation burned. My face flushed. I thought I was prepared for it, but nothing prepares you for being erased in front of your entire family. Until Mr. Clayman paused. Before we close, he said slowly, Mr. Jameson requested I read a final document. A sealed amendment filed 36 hours before his death, and this one was private. He opened a separate envelope. The room tensed. Mr. Clayman's voice shifted. In this sealed addendum, Harrison Jameson wrote, and I quote, "What comes next will be a surprise to most of you. But it shouldn't be. Riley is the only one in this family who never asked me for anything, who never tried to impress me or manipulate me. She showed me love when I was at my worst, and when she was at hers." Gasps. My heart stopped. I hereby name Riley Jameson, the sole beneficiary of my primary estate, including but not limited to the house, the farmland, all remaining investments, and my private trust account containing $18.6 million. The room exploded. What the hell? My dad barked. My mother stood up so fast her chair fell backward. Avery was pale. That's a mistake." But it wasn't. Mr. Clayman turned the document around. My grandfather's signature was clear. Notarized. Time-stamped. They turned to look at me. And I just sat there, still, quiet, numb. And then, before anyone could speak, Mr. Clayman added, "There's one more thing. Harrison requested the house deed be transferred today, and that any current occupants vacate within 48 hours. My mother collapsed into her chair. My father's face went sheet white. Avery stood up and stormed out. And me? I finally smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I'd already mourned the family I thought I had. And now I had something new. A future that they couldn't ruin. There's a moment after a bomb drops where the world just goes quiet. No one talks. No one moves. There's just this thick, ringing silence, and the dull thud of realization crashing into the floorboards. That was the room after Mr. Clayman finished reading the final page of my grandfather's will. My parents sat frozen like statues, faces drained of color, expressions flickering between disbelief and horror. My mom still hadn't said a word. My father was blinking hard, like if he just stared at the paper long enough it would rewrite itself. Avery was already gone. She stormed out the second she heard the words, "Riley is the sole beneficiary." I can't lie, part of me expected someone to stand up and scream to tear the document in half or accuse me of forgery. But no one did, because the truth was staring them in the face. And there were witnesses. Mr. Clayman calmly gathered the signed papers, tucked them into his briefcase, and stood. "If there are no further questions, I'll submit these documents for probate immediately. Riley, I'll be in touch tomorrow with the deed transfer paperwork and account information." I nodded, still silent, still stunned. I had walked into that house invisible, and walked out, owning it. I don't even remember driving home. It felt like I was floating. The night air hit me like a wave when I stepped out of the car. I stood there in the street, clutching my purse like it was the only solid thing left. $18 million. The family estate. The farmland. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy for believing my grandfather saw me. That my quiet kindness wasn't waste. That choosing myself, even when it cost me everything, meant something to someone. I opened my apartment door, dropped my keys on the counter, and just stood there. The place was small. 2 rooms, second-hand couch, flickering kitchen light. But it was mine. And now I owned everything they thought they did. The next day, the real work began. I met with Mr. Clayman again, this time in his office. He walked me through every document, every bank account, every asset my grandfather had protected and passed down to me. We talked for hours. "Your grandfather was deliberate," he said. "He knew this would cause tension, but he told me I'd rather be hated for doing right than praised for playing along." I swallowed hard. That sounded like him. Quiet, firm, unapologetically fair. "He believed in you, Riley. It's written into every part of this estate." I didn't cry until I saw the handwritten letter. Folded neatly inside the last envelope was a note, faded ink. A little shaky, but undeniably his. "My Riley, they'll never admit how much you scared them. You weren't obedient. You were honest. And the world punishes honesty. But I won't. I love you. always have, always go build something better than they ever imagined. Grandpa, I read that letter 5 times before I let myself breathe again. Then I tucked it into my journal like armor. It didn't take long for the backlash to start. 3 days later, my mom showed up at my apartment. She didn't call, didn't text, just banged on my door like the building was on fire. When I opened it, she pushed her way in. She wore sunglasses and a cashmere coat like this was a shopping trip. Like she hadn't smirked at me 3 days ago like I was a joke. I need to talk to you, she said, crossing her arms. I leaned against the kitchen counter. Then talk. She looked around like the place offended her. You can't possibly live here now. You have the estate. You'll be moving into the house. I raised an eyebrow. Which house? Your grandfather's house, of course. The way she corrected herself, the way it stung her. I almost laughed. I haven't decided what I'm doing with it yet, I said calmly. It might go on the market. She blinked. You can't sell the family house. I can. It's mine. Silence. Then she pulled off her sunglasses. Her eyes were glassy, red-rimmed. I expected anger, manipulation, maybe even a bribe. But what I didn't expect was desperation. We were counting on that trust, she whispered. Your father, he's leveraged Avery's business. She stopped herself. I let the silence hang. You humiliated us, she snapped, voice shaking. I tilted my head. No, you did that. At the will reading. Remember? She flinched. I didn't ask for any of this, I said. But I'm not apologizing for being loved by the only person in that family who actually saw me. Her jaw clenched. She grabbed her purse and marched to the door. Before she left, she turned back. I hope it was worth it. I met her eyes. It was. 2 weeks later, the house was officially mine. I stood in the empty foyer, heels echoing on the marble floors, memories crawling out of every corner. The same hallway where my mother once screamed at me for choosing writing over law school. The same kitchen where my father threw his whiskey glass when I said no to a business deal he offered as a way back into the family. The same stairs where I sat at 16, crying quietly, wondering why I always felt like the odd piece in a puzzle that never quite fit. Now, every inch of it was mine, and I felt no desire to stay. I listed the house. Quietly. Privately. And I didn't just sell it. I donated a quarter of the profits to a foundation that funds housing for estranged LGBTQ Pole youth. The very people families like mine throw away when they don't fit a mold. The rest? I reinvested in myself. I bought a cottage by the lake, nothing massive, just peaceful, with a porch swing and a fireplace and books stacked on every shelf. I started a nonprofit under my grandfather's name, a mentorship fund for young writers with no family support, because if I'd had something like that 5 years ago, I wouldn't have felt so alone. Then, one day, a letter came in the mail. No return address, just 2 words in fine black ink. I'm sorry. Inside was a folded note, Avery's handwriting. You won, and I hated you for it. But the truth is, I never really earned anything I got. I see that now. You earned everything. I hope one day I can too. I didn't reply, but I didn't throw it away either. I tucked it beside Grandpa's letter, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved peace. Some people think the hard part ends when you win, when the court recognizes your name, when the deed is in your hands, when the people who humiliated you are finally silent. But they don't talk about what comes after. The quiet, the doubt, the slow return of old voices, not theirs, but your own. The one that says, maybe they were right. Maybe you were never supposed to have all this. For the first few weeks in the lake cottage, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that moment in the will reading, the way their faces collapsed when my name was spoken. How my mother looked like someone had ripped her heart out, and how my father couldn't even make eye contact. And somewhere deep inside me, I wondered, was this justice or cruelty? I spent my mornings on the porch, coffee in one hand, pen in the other. I filled pages with thoughts I didn't even realize I had. about being the invisible daughter, about pretending to be grateful for scrap, about the way they smiled when I was small and obedient, and how quickly that smile disappeared when I became someone they couldn't control. I wrote about Grandpa, how he used to sneak me pieces of candy during family dinners and wink across the table when my mother scolded me for talking too much. How he once told me, "You don't have to earn love, but you do have to protect it." And now, with everything he left me, I finally understood what he meant. One afternoon, as the leaves began to turn outside my window, I got a message from Mr. Clayman. "Something came through the probate court today," he said. "Thought you might want to see it in person." I drove into the city, heart thumping. His office hadn't changed. Same oak shelves, same dark green curtains. But when I stepped in, he didn't greet me with paperwork. He handed me a sealed envelope, a legal one. "This," he said, "was a contingency clause." I frowned. "What kind of clause?" He smiled slightly. "Your grandfather was thorough. In the event that anyone tried to contest your inheritance, he left instructions." I raised an eyebrow. "Someone's contesting it." He nodded. "Your parents, they filed last week." "Of course they did. They're claiming undue influence," he said, "saying you manipulated Harrison in his final days, that he wasn't of sound mind." I let out a bitter laugh. My grandfather was sharper on his worst day than both of them combined. "I know," he said, "and so does the court." I opened the envelope. Inside was a short video clip, time-stamped just days before my grandfather died. It was him, sitting on the porch of the summer house, holding a photo of me. "If they come for her, show them this." I made this decision with full capacity. Riley didn't ask for anything. She never does. That's why she deserves it. I swallowed hard. Even in death, he was still shielding me. Clayman continued. "With this, their claim won't survive a hearing. But that's not the only reason I asked you here." He slid a second folder across the table. "What's this?" I asked. "Your grandfather had accounts that weren't tied to the estate. Separate holdings, a private investment fund. He listed you as sole beneficiary in those too." I stared at the number at the bottom of the page. My breath caught in my throat. It was more than the trust, more than the house. It was legacy wealth. Quietly grown, quietly stored. Just for me. "He didn't just protect you," Clayman said. "He believed in you, completely." I blinked back tears. "I don't even know what to do with all this." He smiled. "Then maybe start by deciding who you want to be now that no one's trying to stop you." That night, I sat at the long wooden table in my lake cottage and lit a single candle. I laid out my journal, opened to a blank page, and wrote, "Who am I, now that I'm no longer small enough to please them?" And under that, who could I become if I no longer needed their approval? I didn't have the answers. Not yet. But I had time now, and space, and power. And I had a plan. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to a financial advisor, not the type who talks in cold numbers, but a woman I'd found through a friend, known for helping women rebuild after family trauma. We talked about investments, long-term giving, and how to structure a life, not just around security, but freedom. The second call was to a lawyer. I wanted to start a foundation in Grandpa's name, something permanent. Something that honored the man who gave me the chance no one else ever would. We drafted plans for a program that would fund college education for estranged daughters, young women who were kicked out, disowned, overlooked. The third call was harder. It was to Avery. She didn't pick up, so I left a message. "I got your note, and I hear you. I don't know if I'm ready to talk, but if you ever want to meet as sisters, not as rivals, I'll be at the summer house on Sunday." I didn't know if she'd come, but it felt right to leave the door open, not for them, but for me. Sunday came. I waited on the porch, the same porch where Grandpa filmed that final message. I wore jeans and a soft sweater, no armor, no mask. The wind was cool, and the trees were starting to go gold. I made 2 mugs of tea, and just as I started to think she wouldn't come, a silver car pulled up the gravel path. She stepped out slowly, hesitantly. Avery. Hair tied back, no makeup. Jeans and a jacket, no designer bag, just her. She didn't say anything at first. She just walked up the steps, sat across from me, and stared at her tea. After a long silence, she whispered, "I was awful to you." I nodded. "Yes, you were." I let them pit us against each other. I thought being chosen meant I mattered more. I swallowed. I used to think being ignored meant I mattered less. She looked up, eyes glassy. "I'm sorry," she said again. "Not because you won, but because I never tried to understand you." I didn't hug her. I didn't cry. I just poured her more tea. And for the first time in our lives, we talked. Not as favorites or failures, not as enemies, just as two women who grew up in the same broken house, finally trying to build something honest in its place. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when the people who once towered over you finally shrink down to size, when you realize their power was always borrowed, always conditional. After that Sunday afternoon on the porch with Avery, something shifted. Not between us. That's still delicate, like glass that cracked and got taped back together. But inside me, I stopped checking their social media. I stopped wondering what they were saying behind closed doors. I stopped carrying the invisible weight of their approval, because for the first time in my life, I just didn't need it anymore. A few days later, Mr. Clayman called with an update. My parents' challenge to the will had been dismissed fast, brutal, and final. The court saw the video, the notarized documents, the timeline. There was no wiggle room. They didn't even show up to the hearing. Cowards. "Your inheritance is officially untouchable," Clayman said. "They can't come after any of it now." I thanked him, hung up, and just sat. The silence around me was full of closure, and I knew this was the last time I'd ever have to think about courtrooms or estate battles, or being erased by the people who raised me. It was over, which meant something new could finally begin. I spent the next month transforming the summer house, not into a museum, not into a monument to loss, into a beginning. I stripped the wallpaper in the upstairs bedrooms, repainted the walls in soft earth tones, replaced the old furniture with warm, mismatched pieces from local markets. Each room had a purpose: a writing room with a wall of journal, a sitting room with old records and cozy blankets, a library stocked with stories from survivors, dreamers, and women who'd learned to survive betrayal with grace. And then I opened the doors, not for tours, for women like me, women cut off from families for not being obedient enough, women called ungrateful for wanting space, women who were handed shame and told it was love. I called it the Harrison House. Not because Grandpa would have wanted his name everywhere, but because I did. Because he saw me when no one else did. And I wanted that legacy, that kind of seeing, to keep going. One morning, I got a letter from a girl named Jordan. My mom stopped speaking to me after I told her I didn't want to be a doctor. She said I was wasting my life. "I work at a bookstore now. I make enough to get by, but barely. I can't afford therapy, and I don't feel safe at home. I saw your foundation online. I don't know if I belong there, but I think I need it." I read it twice. Then I printed it out and pinned it to a corkboard in the hallway. That same day, Jordan became our first guest. She stayed 2 weeks, and when she left, she hugged me with tears in her eyes and said, "You gave me back a version of myself I thought I lost forever." I cried after she left, not because I was sad, but because I was finally seeing it too. What I had created, what I had become. Then, on a warm Thursday afternoon, Avery showed up again. No appointment, no text, just a knock on the door and a brown paper bag full of baked goods. "Peace offering," she said with a wry smile. I let her in. She looked around, took in the painted walls and sun-drenched windows and bookshelf-lined halls. "This place feels like breath," she said. "Like you walk in and your lungs remember how to fill up again." I smiled. "That's the goal. We sat at the table with coffee. She pulled out a stack of papers. Poems. Her poems. I started writing again, she said, her voice soft. I haven't since college, but being around you, it reminded me I still have something to say. That hit me hard, because I'd always been the quiet one, the overlooked one, the one they said was too emotional, too sensitive. And now my sensitivity was saving people, including my sister. A week later, she brought our mother. I didn't expect it. I wasn't ready for it, but she came. No pearls, no makeup, no wine in her hand, just her. She stood at the edge of the porch, like she wasn't sure she belonged. And to be honest, I wasn't sure she did either, but I nodded. Once, quietly. She stepped forward. We didn't hug, we didn't cry, she didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. But she said something I didn't expect. I don't recognize you anymore, she said. And I think that's the problem. You became someone we couldn't control. And instead of celebrating that, we punished it. I didn't speak, because I didn't need to. She was finally saying the truth out loud. She looked down at her shoes. I won't ask you to forget what we did. I hope someday you'll believe we loved you in the only way we knew how. I looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, she didn't seem powerful. She seemed small, human, broken, in her own way. I don't want your love, I said gently. Not if it costs me myself. She nodded, swallowed hard, left. Avery stayed behind, helped me prep guest rooms, baked muffins with me like we were 10 again. And for once, we didn't talk about the past. We just were. That night, I stood alone on the back porch, under a sky full of stars. The air smelled like rosemary and clean wood. I held Grandpa's letter in my hand. Go build something better than they ever imagined. And I whispered into the night. I did. By the time our third guest moved into the Harrison house, I stopped calling it mine. It wasn't my house anymore. Not just. It belonged to every woman who ever stood in a room full of people who were supposed to love her and watched them choose cruelty over care. The house was healing now. The porch creaked with soft laughter. The hallways echoed with the sound of journals flipping open, tears falling without shame, and truth being spoken for the first time in years. I still lived in the cottage by the lake. It gave me distance, quiet, but I visited the house every morning, watering the plants, checking the mailbox, baking scones like Grandpa used to. And every day, the wall of letters grew, pinned to corkboards, taped to mirrors, slipped into books. Letters from women like Jordan, who left with a business plan, from Tasha, who brought her newborn and left with a new sense of identity, from Clarissa, who'd been silenced for so long that simply saying I matter felt like a scream. Their stories wrapped around me like armor. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a victim of what they did to me. I felt like the woman I was always meant to become. Then, in early spring, I received a letter that made my hands tremble, not from Avery, not from a guest, from my father. It was handwritten, careful, like he'd sat with each word for hours before committing it to ink. Riley, I know you don't want to hear from me. I don't blame you. I wouldn't want to hear from me either, but something has changed. And before it's too late, I need to say what I never did. You were never less than. You were never a disappointment. You were just beyond me. You lived with a kind of truth I spent my whole life avoiding. That terrified me. I was wrong. About you. About Grandpa. About what matters. I don't expect a response. I just want you to know. I see it now. Everything. And I am ashamed. It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But it was honest, and from him. That meant more than 1,000 I'm sorries. I folded the letter, slid it into a drawer with the others, and let the moment pass through me, without judgment. Growth doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it just knocks quietly and waits to be noticed. Later that week, I stood in the main room of the Harrison house. watching Avery lead our first ever workshop for sisters who no longer speak. She'd come a long way. She'd started showing up once a week, volunteering. At first, she just brought food. Then she started reading aloud during writing sessions. Eventually, she opened up about her own guilt, how being the favorite came with its own prison bars. She told a group of women, "Privilege doesn't mean peace, it just means you're being rewarded for keeping the system running." I watched her with pride and a strange ache. This was the sister I'd always hoped for. Maybe not the one I grew up with, but the one I could grow forward with. Afterward, we sat on the porch with lemonade in silence. "I got a job," she said finally. I blinked. "You?" She smiled. "Nothing fancy. Assistant at a non-profit in town. It's not about the money. It's just, I wanted to do something that didn't require pretending." I nodded. "That's a good reason to do anything." She sipped her drink. "Do you ever miss them? Mom and Dad?" I looked out across the yard, where a group of women sat in the grass, talking and laughing, their voices full of sunlight. "No," I said honestly. "I miss what I thought they could be, but not who they are." She nodded. "I think that's why it hurt so much, because they made us believe we were the broken ones." I sighed. "And we spent years trying to prove them wrong, when the truth was, we were never broken to begin with. We built something beautiful that spring, a garden in the back of the house, a library of guest-written books, a scholarship fund in Grandpa's name. Every new woman who arrived added something, a photo, a quote, a seed. The house became a mosaic of pain turned into purpose. And then one afternoon, as the daffodils bloomed and the sun dipped low, I stood alone in the hallway and read the quote I'd written at the beginning. They gave my sister everything. They gave me silence. I built an empire with it, and I smiled, because the empire didn't look like castles or money or marble floors. It looked like a porch full of women sipping tea without fear. It looked like blank pages filling up with reclaimed stories. It looked like a girl who once walked out of a will reading Humiliated, now surrounded by a legacy no one could take away. Then came the knock. Not at the cottage, at the Harrison house. A soft, uncertain knock. I opened the door, and there they stood, my parents, both of them. No bodyguards, no smug expressions, no cameras, just aging faces, tight with discomfort and unspoken words. I didn't move, I didn't invite them in, I just waited. My father cleared his throat. "We were hoping to talk." I looked at the sign behind me, the one every guest sees first. "No one here has to earn their worth. It's already theirs." Then I looked back at them and said, "This house isn't for performances. If you're here to be seen, go elsewhere. But if you're here to listen, I'll make tea." They looked at each other. Then they stepped inside, one slow, quiet step at a time. They stepped over the threshold like they weren't sure the floor would hold them. My mother in a beige sweater I'd never seen before. Nothing designer, no pearls, no lipstick. My father, shoulders hunched like someone who'd stopped pretending to be the strongest man in the room. They looked small in the entryway, the kind of small that only happens after the fall. I led them to the living room without a word. The couches were mismatched and soft. There was a woven blanket on one armrest, a plate of lemon scones on the table, and a faint trace of lavender in the air from the diffuser by the window. This wasn't the house they remembered, and that was the point. I poured tea for them, and for myself, sat down, waited. They didn't reach for the scones, didn't sip the tea, just looked around like they were waiting for permission to speak. "You changed the house," my mother said quietly. I nodded. "It changed me first." My father let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped for years. "This isn't easy," he said. "Coming here, you're not the only ones who've said that," I replied. "But they didn't try to contest a will first." His face dropped. My mother flinched. "Good. Let it sting. I didn't come here to soften the truth, but I wasn't here to punish them either." "I don't want your money," he said. "I know what we did. I know what we took from you." I didn't reply. I wanted to hear it all. Every word they'd avoided for years. "I didn't know how to love a daughter like you," he continued. "Someone with her own voice, her own compass. You didn't fit into the plan, and instead of adjusting the plan, we pushed you out of it." My mother added, And when he left it all to you, I didn't feel betrayed by him. I felt exposed. I looked at her. Because he saw me? She nodded. And because I didn't. Silence again. Heavy, but not unbearable. They looked different now, not innocent. They'd never be that. But real. The masks were gone. The performances had finally run out of stage. I'm not here to be your daughter again, I said firmly. Not in the way you remember. That version of me doesn't exist anymore. You buried her when you chose silence over support. My mother's eyes brimmed, but she didn't reach for me. Good. Because I wasn't done. This place isn't yours. It never was. It's for the people who had to survive people like you, who had to rebuild themselves from the ashes of being overlooked. This house was built from the wreckage you left behind. They both looked down. I wasn't yelling. I didn't need to. My calm was the most powerful thing in the room, but I added, if you're here to listen, not to fix, not to reclaim, then you can stay. For now. They nodded. It wasn't an apology, not yet. But it was surrender. And sometimes, that's the beginning. Avery joined us later that afternoon. She sat between them like a translator, her presence soft but steady. She'd become something none of us expected, the bridge. Riley, she said. Mom's been volunteering at the library. Dad's been helping veterans file for housing. They're trying. I didn't smile, but I acknowledged it with a nod. Trying doesn't undo harm, but it's a start. My mother looked up. I know you think I came here for forgiveness. I don't, I said, because I'm not offering it, not in the way you want it. Her voice cracked. Then why let us in? I looked around the room. At the books. The letters. The photos of every woman who had passed through here and left something behind. Because he would have, I said simply. And because I don't want to carry this weight forever. The days that followed were quiet. They didn't ask for anything. Didn't try to insert themselves. They just helped. Dad fixed a leaking pipe in the back shed. Mom swept the porch every morning before sunrise. They ate meals with the guests, listened during group sessions, even cried once or twice. They were finally learning how to exist without taking up all the space in the room. And I was learning how to let them. Not into my heart. Not into my trust, but into the version of reality where healing could at least be possible. Then came the event. The 1-year anniversary of the Harrison house. A celebration, a ceremony, and a reading of letters from past guests. We hung fairy lights in the trees. We built a small stage in the backyard. People came from all over. Women who had once walked through our doors carrying shame, and now returned carrying strength. Jordan spoke first. Then Tasha. Then Avery. And finally they handed the mic to me. I stood under the stars. The house glowing behind me. The porch full of people I once feared would never exist in my life. I unfolded a paper. My voice didn't shake. They humiliated me at the will reading. I was erased in front of a room full of family. But what they didn't realize was that moment wasn't my ending. It was my origin story. The crowd went still. Every eye locked on me. Because when you take everything from someone, when you leave them with silence, you forget one thing: silence can echo, and echo long enough, it becomes a voice. I looked toward the porch. My parents were seated at the edge, heads bowed, and I finished. This house, this legacy isn't built from revenge. It's built from truth, from every girl who was told she was too much, from every daughter who watched her family clap for her failure. We're not just survivors, we're architects. And we're building something they can never take away. The applause was thunderous, but what mattered most was that I meant every word. A year ago, they called my name last not to honor me, but to remind me I was forgotten. Today, people fly across the country just to sit on this porch and say their own names for the first time in years, without shame, without apology. That's what the Harrison house became. Not a memorial to betrayal, but a sanctuary of reclamation. After the 1-year event, I stayed up late cleaning. Avery helped. We laughed about the string lights tangled in the trees, the carrot cake that fell apart in the kitchen, and the sound system that shorted mid-poem. It was the first time in my entire life I'd laughed with my sister without waiting for the other shoe to drop. She was happy, I was happy, and for once, we didn't have to earn it. At midnight when she left, I stood in the garden alone, the same place I once buried all the versions of myself they didn't want. The air smelled like rosemary and wood smoke. Crickets hummed softly in the distance. I looked at the old swing Grandpa built decades ago and let myself cry. Not because I was broken, because I was whole. And wholeness comes with tears too. The next day, I got a call from Clayman. He rarely called now, unless something mattered. "Riley," he said, "there's something I've been holding on to. Something your grandfather gave me before his passing. He told me to wait exactly 1 year after the reading, and then to hand it to you." I sat up straighter. "What is it?" "I'd rather not say over the phone." "Can you come by?" An hour later, I was sitting in his office again. It looked the same, only now I sat in the seat across from him, with ease, not fear, not desperation. He slid an envelope across the desk. "This," he said, "was your grandfather's final gift, not legal, not financial, just personal." I opened it slowly. Inside was a short letter and a worn key tied to a red string. "Riley, you gave me peace in my final days. I knew I'd leave this world with chaos behind me, but I also knew you'd bring order to it, not through control, but through care. This key is to the old boathouse by the northern dock. You used to play there as a child. I renovated it privately before I got sick. I left you something there, something no one else will understand but you. Take your time. But when you're ready, go unlock what I couldn't say out loud." My heart pounded. The boathouse? I hadn't stepped foot near it in over a decade. That evening, I walked the dirt trail through the woods to the edge of the lake. The boathouse sat quietly, covered in vines, faded blue paint peeling off the side. It looked forgotten, just like me at that will reading. But the key slid into the rusted lock easily. Inside, the space was clean, bare floors, dusty windows, and in the center of the room, a large trunk, wooden, heavy, carved initials, H.J. I opened it slowly. Inside were boxes, folders, old tapes, photos of me from childhood, ones I didn't even know existed, drawings I'd made, stories I wrote when I was 9, recordings of me reading poems to him on the porch. There was a note on top. "You thought I wasn't paying attention, but I saved everything." I covered my mouth with my hand, breath shaking. He'd saved my entire life. The parts they didn't care to notice. A history, preserved, a record, not of what I became, but of who I'd always been. I spent the next 3 days cataloging everything. I turned the boathouse into a private gallery, only for me. Only when I needed to remember who I am. That was Grandpa's final gift. Not money, not property, memory. Months passed. My parents never moved in. They stayed in their small townhome, across the state line, quieter now. Humbled in a way that wasn't performative. We didn't become close, but they came to a few events. They never asked for the microphone, never tried to reclaim the stage. They just sat and listened. That was enough. Forgiveness didn't need to look like it did in movies. It looked like space, respect, boundaries honored without explanation. On the second anniversary of Grandpa's passing, I stood on the dock, looking out at the lake as the sun dipped below the trees. I held his letter in one hand and my journal in the other. I'd started writing again. Really writing. Not just for myself. For others. A collection of essays, stories from women who found themselves in our guest bedrooms. Pieces of their pain, and their strength, and their fire. It was called The Second Will. Because that's what we all had to become. A second chance. A second voice. A second version of ourselves. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Not to the sky. Not to some faraway spirit. To the version of me that kept going, that didn't shrink, that didn't break. that stood in that cold marble room when they handed everything to my sister, and still stayed standing when the truth came through. They humiliated me at the will reading. But in the end, I inherited everything that mattered. Their money couldn't make them proud, but my silence, it became my roar. And now, everyone hears